He sat on the edge of the cracked sidewalk, his back against the rough brick of an old laundromat, watching the world pass like a slow, blurry film reel. His name was Marvin, a name barely remembered even by those who once knew him. Once a father, once a husband, once a soldier. Now, mostly forgotten, mostly invisible. The Milwaukee summer was heavy that day, humid, clinging to the skin, suffocating even in the shade. His hands trembled slightly, but not from the heat. Wrapped gently in his palms, protected like something sacred, was a small object. Not a phone, not money. Just a humble package, no bigger than his fist, folded carefully in layers of brown paper, salvaged from a discarded grocery bag. A string of twine kept it closed. It looked like nothing to most, but to Marvin it was everything. He had spent 3 weeks making it. 3 weeks sitting behind a vacant church on North 12th Street, under a half-broken awning, working patiently with what little he had. A broken chair leg had become the base. Sandpaper? He didn't have any. So he'd found bits of concrete and brick, smoothed the wood with torn rags, polished it with an old sock soaked in rainwater. It was a cross, simple, rough-edged, but deliberate. At the end of it, a loop of string so it could hang around a neck. Every curve, every notch was shaped with purpose. It wasn't perfect, but it was personal. It was his. He made it for Giannis, not because he wanted anything, not because he believed it would change his life, but because something about the man, that man, had reached into the frayed parts of his soul and stirred something still alive. Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak, MVP, champion, a man who had climbed from nothing and made it to everything. There were interviews Marvin had watched on store TVs through windows, news clips playing in bars he couldn't afford to enter. He remembered one, especially, where Giannis said, "I remember the days we didn't have food, when we had to sell stuff on the streets to survive. I never forget where I came from." That line, that exact line had done something to Marvin. A man like him, a man who had made it, but still remembered the struggle, deserved more than applause. He deserved a gift. Not from a corporation, not from a brand, from someone who knew intimately what it meant to have nothing. So when Marvin overheard 2 teenage boys talking about a public event where Giannis would be appearing, a community outreach day at the local rec center on Silver Spring Drive, he didn't hesitate. He didn't sleep that night, just stared at the wrapped cross under the flickering light of a street lamp. He woke early, dressed in the cleanest clothes he had, which meant they were only slightly torn instead of shredded, a shirt missing buttons, pants held together at the waist with a shoelace. He washed his face in the fountain near the park, combed his hair with his fingers, and tucked the package safely inside his coat pocket, even though it was summer. As he walked the 7 blocks to the center, he rehearsed his words in his head. "I made this for you, Mr. Giannis. It's not much, but I thought maybe you'd like it." "No, too nervous. Sir, I just want to give you something, if that's okay." "No, too formal." He'd figure it out when the time came. When he arrived, the area around the rec center was already crowded. Kids running around with basketballs, parents chatting in groups, teenagers on their phones, volunteers in bright green shirts organizing snacks and activities. There were speakers playing upbeat music. A small stage had been set up near the entrance. A banner read, "Back to the Community Day," featuring Giannis Antetokounmpo. Marvin stood at the edge of the lot, his hands clenched into fists, nervous, out of place. He knew people noticed him, even when they tried to pretend they didn't. A few glances, a whisper here, a sideways look there. He was used to it. But this was different. He didn't come to beg. He came to give. He kept his eyes low, his fingers brushing the edge of the package in his coat pocket like it was a prayer bead. "Sir, you okay?" a young woman asked, a volunteer, maybe no older than 20. Marvin nodded. "I just came to see Mr. Antetokounmpo, that's all. I'm not sure if they're letting folks inside without tickets, but maybe you can wait near the fence. He sometimes comes around to say hi." Marvin thanked her and shuffled closer to the perimeter, taking a seat on a curb shaded by a thin tree. He waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun climbed. He watched kids play pickup games on the outdoor court. He watched parents take selfies with mascots. He listened to the announcements over the loudspeaker. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Then came the moment. The crowd shifted. A murmur rolled through the people. Phones lifted into the air like 1,000 tiny antennas. Applause broke out. Someone shouted, "There he is!" Marvin stood slowly. His knees ached. He clutched the package in both hands now, like an offering. And there he was, Giannis, emerging from a black SUV, tall, graceful, unmistakable. He was dressed casually, jeans, a black t-shirt, sneakers, but he looked like something out of a storybook, or maybe a dream Marvin wasn't sure he was awake for. The athlete walked with a smile on his face, greeting children, shaking hands, laughing easily. The cameras loved him, but something in his gaze remained grounded. He wasn't floating above the world, he was in it. Marvin began to approach, slowly, carefully, like a man trying not to spook a deer. A security guard stepped into his path. "Sir, please stay behind the cones." I made him something," Marvin whispered. The guard narrowed his eyes, but before he could answer, the same volunteer from earlier spotted them. "He's okay," she said gently. "He just wants to give Giannis a gift." The guard hesitated, then stepped aside, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, Marvin stepped forward with purpose. The noise of the crowd fell away. It didn't matter that people were watching. It didn't matter that his clothes were tattered or that his shoes were mismatched. For one brief, defiant second, Marvin forgot shame. Giannis saw him, not just looked, saw. He tilted his head slightly, as if reading something in the man's face, and then, before anyone else could react, he walked toward Marvin. The two met in the middle of the lot, no cameras, no speeches, just them. "I made this for you," Marvin said. His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "It's not much, but it's from the heart." He handed over the brown paper bundle, hands trembling. Giannis accepted it with both hands, slowly unwrapping the twine. When he saw what was inside, he paused. The silence between them was electric. Giannis lifted the cross gently, turning it in his fingers. The wood, though rough, had been carved with care. He saw the marks, the grooves, the attention to detail. "You made this?" he asked, eyes meeting Marvin's. The older man nodded. "I know what it means to have nothing. You never forgot. So I figured maybe you'd understand." Giannis didn't answer at first. Instead, he did something no one expected. He stepped forward and hugged the man. Full, firm, with both arms like a brother, like someone who knew exactly what it cost to be seen, to give when you had nothing left. And that's when everything changed. In the stillness of that embrace, people began to quiet down. Phones lowered, conversations stopped. A hush fell over the area as if something sacred was taking place. No one told them to be quiet. They just felt it. Giannis whispered something to Marvin that no one else could hear. The man nodded, and for a second he cried. Not the loud, sobbing cry of despair, but the quiet, trembling cry of a man who finally felt human again. For a long moment, time itself seemed to freeze. In the still air of that Milwaukee afternoon, amid the scuffed concrete and the smell of hot dogs and summer sweat, the image of Giannis Antetokounmpo embracing a weathered, homeless man became something more than just a photo opportunity. It became a moment of truth. Marvin stood inside that hug like a man thawing after a long, bitter winter. He hadn't been held like that in years, maybe decades. Not since his daughter had been small enough to cling to his chest. Not since his wife used to wait for him after shifts at the plant, smiling through the fatigue. The world had taken so much from him since then. Jobs, people, shelter, trust. But this gesture, this contact, this kindness, no one could take that. Giannis finally pulled back, hands still on Marvin's shoulders. "This is beautiful," he said, holding the cross up to his chest. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Marvin said, voice low. "That's why I did." There was an honesty in the man's words that struck something deep inside Giannis. He had received countless gifts, luxury watches, art pieces, even custom sneakers made by fans. But this was different. This wasn't about celebrity or status. It was about recognition. Humanity. Someone who had so little had still felt compelled to give. Giannis turned to the crowd that had gathered. Without ceremony, he slipped the makeshift cross over his head, letting it rest gently against his chest. A ripple moved through the onlookers. Phones came back up, not to gawk but to witness, to remember. Giannis turned to Marvin again. "What's your name?" "Marvin." "Where are you from?" "Right here. Been here all my life, pretty much. Used to live on 28th and Wright. Had a shop back in the day fixing furniture. That's where I learned how to carve, not professionally, just with my hands, with what I had." Giannis nodded, visibly moved. "You still carve?" "Sometimes, when I can find the wood." A weak smile. "Not much demand for old chairs or crosses made out of broken pallets." "You'd be surprised," Giannis said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he did something unexpected again. "Come with me." Marvin blinked. "Where?" "Inside. I want you to meet someone." Marvin hesitated. His legs weren't used to movement. His body wasn't used to invitations, but something in Giannis's tone made it impossible to refuse. So he followed. The security guard who had tried to turn Marvin away earlier stepped aside without a word this time. Inside the rec center, air conditioning washed over them, merciful and sharp. The noise outside faded into a quiet hum as the doors closed. Giannis led Marvin to a small room behind the main gym, used for volunteers and staff. Inside, a few people sat at a folding table, eating sandwiches, checking phones. They looked up as the NBA star entered, and silence followed again as they noticed the man beside him. Giannis gestured to a tall man in a grey polo, mid-30s, sharp eyes behind glasses. "This is Jason. He helps me run our community projects. Jason, this is Marvin." Jason stood and extended his hand without hesitation. "Pleasure to meet you." Marvin accepted it, unsure of what was happening. "He made me this," Giannis said, holding up the cross. "By hand. Took him weeks." Jason's eyebrows lifted. "That's really something. You made this?" Marvin nodded, unsure where this was going. "He's got real skill," Giannis said. "Furniture, carving, repair work. Said he used to have a shop." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "We've been looking to expand the vocational wing of the youth center. Could use someone to run a woodshop program, teach some basics. A few of the kids have already shown interest." Marvin stared at him, the words floating in the air like they were in a language he hadn't heard in years. "You want me to teach?" Jason shrugged. "If you want. We could talk details. It wouldn't be full-time at first. Stipend, some meals, shelter support through our partners. Not charity, just work, real work, based on your skills." Marvin felt his legs wobble. He reached out for the edge of the table to steady himself. I don't know what to say." Giannis stepped closer, putting a hand on his back. "Say yes. The kids need someone like you, and you deserve more than a sidewalk." Tears sprang to Marvin's eyes before he could stop them. He looked down at the floor, trying to breathe. The room was quiet, respectful. No one pitied him. They just waited. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. Yes, I'll try." Giannis smiled, not a celebrity grin, not a photo smile, but a genuine, deep look of affirmation. That's all any of us can do. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Giannis returned to the public event, now wearing the wooden cross. He mentioned Marvin only once during a brief speech to the crowd. "Today I was reminded that greatness isn't about stats, it's about character, and character can come from the most unexpected places." He didn't name Marvin, didn't tell the cameras where he came from. He protected the man's dignity even as he honored his gift. Later that night, after the last tent had been taken down and the parking lot emptied, Marvin sat in a shelter bed, arranged quietly by Giannis's team. He stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed, replaying the day. Not the fame, not the cameras, but the touch, the words, the offer. He hadn't planned on anything. He hadn't come for help. He came to give a cross made of broken wood, and he walked away with something even more fragile and powerful, a second chance. And somewhere across town, Giannis sat in his home, looking at the handmade cross on his nightstand. It wasn't symmetrical, it wasn't polished, but it was honest. It had weight. He picked it up, ran his fingers along the grooves, and whispered something in Greek under his breath. A prayer, maybe. A promise. Because what Marvin had reminded him was something even the greatest athletes forget. The measure of a person isn't in how high they rise, but in how deeply they remember to reach back. And that day, Giannis didn't just receive a gift, he became one. In the days that followed, the moment spread like wildfire, but in the most unexpected way. It wasn't just another viral clip, a celebrity hugging a homeless man, a human interest story made to vanish with the next headline. No. This was different. The rawness of the moment, the sincerity on Giannis's face, the weathered grace of Marvin's hands as he gave away something so lovingly made, it resonated. Not because it was polished, but because it was real. The clip had no background music, no fancy edit, just shaky phone footage capturing the seconds when a global superstar paused the entire world to honor a man no one else saw. Across Milwaukee and quickly across the country, people began asking, who was the man who gave Giannis that wooden cross? But Giannis remained silent on the details. He refused interviews on the subject. He didn't post about Marvin, didn't mention his full name. It's not about me, he said when asked. It's about reminding ourselves who we're doing this for. Behind the scenes, however, things were already shifting. Marvin spent his first night in a clean bed in nearly 2 years. The shelter Giannis's team coordinated wasn't fancy, but it was dignified, private, safe, and quiet. He was given clothes that fit, meals that warmed the bones, and a caseworker named Brianna who treated him like a person, not a file. But more than all that, he was given time. Time to sit in the chapel of the shelter and remember what silence felt like. Time to write down thoughts in a notebook someone had left beside his bunk. Time to feel something he hadn't dared in years. Hope. A week later, Marvin visited the youth center, where Giannis had first brought him. Jason met him at the door. "You ready?" "I don't even know what ready feels like anymore," Marvin chuckled. "That's close enough." The center's workshop was modest. A few benches, tools that needed replacing, cabinets filled with potential, and a half-dozen kids who looked up when Marvin entered, half curious, half bored in the way only teenagers could be. Jason introduced him quickly. "This is Mr. Marvin. He's going to be teaching y'all some basics, real work, none of that YouTube shortcut stuff." The kids nodded, some shrugging, some not even pretending to care. But Marvin didn't mind. He knew this script. Respect wasn't given on arrival, it was earned, carved slowly over time, just like wood. He started small, had them sand scrap pieces, talked to them about grain and tension, and how every piece of wood has a memory inside it, waiting to be uncovered. Some laughed at that, but others listened. One boy in particular, Kenny, no more than 13, stayed behind after the first session. "You really used to build chairs?" Chairs, tables, cabinets, whatever people needed, back when people used to fix things instead of throwing them out. Kenny grinned. "Can we build a chair?" Marvin smiled. "We can build anything, long as you're willing to take your time." It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but it was happening. Over the next few months, Marvin built a rhythm. Mornings at the center, afternoons assisting with maintenance around the shelter, evenings spent sketching designs, drinking weak coffee, talking to volunteers like they were old friends. He laughed again, sometimes even loud, and every so often he carved a new cross, each one slightly different, and left them anonymously in places around the city: a church pew, a diner counter, a park bench. Giannis kept in touch, not publicly, not for show. Sometimes a call, sometimes a visit without cameras. He even brought his brothers once, introducing Marvin like family. "This is the man who reminded me how to be small," he said. Marvin didn't quite know what that meant, but he appreciated it all the same. As the season went on, Giannis wore the original cross every chance he could, under his uniform at press conferences during warm-ups. Commentators began noticing. "What's that necklace?" someone asked during a post-game interview. He just smiled. "Gift from someone I admire." But the biggest shift came near the end of the year. The Bucks announced the opening of a new wing in the community center, the Marvin Workshop, a fully equipped, donation-backed woodshop built to teach young people hands-on skills, craftsmanship, patience, and pride. No pomp, no oversized banners, just a plaque at the entrance, named in honor of a man who gave everything, even when he had nothing. Marvin stood at the opening, flanked by Jason, Brianna, Kenny, and other kids who now called him Mr. M. He wore a shirt someone had ironed just for the occasion, and jeans that fit for the first time in years. When it came time to speak, he kept it short. "I'm not a big talker," he said, clearing his throat. "I spent a long time feeling like the world didn't need people like me anymore. Like I was furniture in a room that had already been redecorated. But turns out even old wood can still hold weight. Thank you for letting me prove that, to you and to myself." The room stood still. Then the applause came, not loud, not explosive, but long and honest. Giannis was there, standing at the back, arms crossed over his chest, smiling. Later, as people trickled out, Marvin sat on a stool inside the shop, watching Kenny tinker with a half-finished shelf. Giannis joined him, leaning against the wall. "You ever think this would happen?" Giannis asked. Marvin looked around. "Not even in my dreams." "You know," Giannis said quietly, "some people chase legacy with stats and trophies, but legacy's not what you leave behind in glass cases. It's what you build in people." Marvin nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Funny thing. I thought I was building that cross for you, but maybe I was building it for me. To remind myself I still could." Giannis said nothing, just reached over and squeezed Marvin's shoulder. A few weeks later, a photo appeared in the Milwaukee Sentinel. It wasn't front-page news, just a feature tucked inside the community section. The image showed Marvin surrounded by kids, all holding small hand-carved crosses. Behind them, the sign, Marvin Workshop. Beneath the photo, a single quote: "When you give with no expectation, the world often gives back more than you imagined." Marvin still lives in Milwaukee, still teaches, still leaves wooden crosses around the city like quiet blessings. He doesn't need recognition, doesn't want it. He's not chasing redemption. He's just living. And as for Giannis, he still wears the same cross, still touches it before every game, still looks for the Marvins in the crowd, the ones nobody else sees, because he remembers. He always remembers. And that day, when a poor man offered him a simple gift, he didn't just receive it. He let it transform him. And through that transformation, he changed another life forever. Not with money, not with fame, but with something far rarer: grace.